Medieval Music again. Well, good evening, Comp 1. It's still November 13th, and I would like to get through more of a continuation of what we were talking about earlier today. And when we were talking about sentences. And I'm not talking about Stanley Fish necessarily, or something I got from Francis Christian Center, Walker Gibson, but I'm thinking of some observations that I've made across the years regarding students making sentences. You know, I bet when you were a kid, you know, you had thoughts like, you know, if you could put all the spaghetti in one pile that I've ever eaten across my whole life, how big would that pile be? You know, kind of similarly, I look back across all my life of reading and ask myself, you know, how many total sentences have I read? How many have I written? How many sentences have I enjoyed, admired, been exasperated by across the last quarter century, created by students? Well, there's millions, just millions. And you know what? They've turned my brain to mush. And that's just fine. It's just great. If I got tired of it, I wouldn't spend my weekends and my evenings doing it. I'm sitting here right now reading a paper by someone in Section 74. So here's what I want to tell you. A while back, I sent several of your colleagues in my face-to-face land classes in my 8:30 and my 9 o'clock section, like I said earlier today, up to the whiteboard. I gave them markers, and I said, you know, I'd like you to just write a sentence on the board, just one sentence, and I'm going to give you the subject. And because it was Student Success Day looming, which one of you attended? That was flattering. I gave them that as the subject. My instructions were dead simple. Go to the whiteboard, take the marker, and write a sentence. And it's just got to be about Student Success Day. That's all I need. And in both classes, I sent 4 or 5 people to the board, and they did exactly what I thought they would do. They wrote a 1-level sentence about Student Success Day. And not only that, they started each sentence with the noun cluster, Student Success Day. There's nothing wrong with it. The sentences were just fine. But here's the deal. When you all went to school, you went to elementary school, your teachers taught you that sentences need to have a noun phrase and a verb phrase. I might get all grammatical on you here for a second, even though I don't have much talent for grammar. But this is what you did. You wrote one sentence after another for them, making certain that you had nouns and verbs, right? Because you had to have something in the sentence, and you had to have something happen to that noun. You had to modify it in some way. You wanted to please your teachers, you were good students, and you wrote endless sentences with that pattern. I think of it as the NC-VC pattern, noun cluster, verb cluster pattern. The thing is, here in your adulthood, or early adulthood for some of you, you have trouble busting out of that pattern. And I will pick up one paper after another that has far too many sentences begin with that noun cluster, verb cluster pattern. And you've got to try to break out of that once in a while. It's not something to worry about while you're writing. It's something you worry about in revision. If you see 10, 12, 14, 15 sentences in a row that start with the noun cluster, with that noun loaded into the front, it's probably time to break out of that stylistically. It can get pretty uninteresting. Let's face that fact. There's a story I've been telling for a number of years, and I think my son is about to hear it for the first time, and I'd like you to meet him, just very briefly. I'm the star here, not him, but this is my son, Jeff, and he is your cameraman, and he's also making me look good with Final Cut Pro. And you get on the other end of the camera where you're supposed to be. Now, he's 17 now, but I have to tell you, when he was a little guy, I'll just never forget this. I've been telling this story for years. He'd be 1.5, 2 years old, and I would come home, and it seemed like every time that I came home, he was eating. It was his occupation. He ate constantly, and he was so heavy, it was like picking up a bag of cement. I mean, he's all skinny now, but he was just this little blob, and I'd come home every day. Do you know the story, son?
Yeah.
I'd come home almost every day, and he would be in his high chair. And I would say the same thing every day. I would ask him the same thing every day. I'd say, "What are you doing, little man? What are you doing?" And he'd say, every day, "I'm eating. I'm eating. I'm eating." day after day after day, I'd come in and say, "What are you doing, little man of mine? What are you doing, little dude? What's up, little guy?" And he'd say, "I'm eating, I'm eating." And he would be. He'd be sitting there and there'd be a plate of food and he would just be shoveling it. And it'd be all over his head and we'd have to take a wash rag, and wipe him down, like I said earlier, like a bowling ball. And then there just came this magic day. I came in, I noticed that the room was filling with sunlight. I could hear in the distance through the forest, this is our old house, half a mile south of here, kind of a cabin in the woods. I heard this distant celestial choir, la, la, la. I heard this note. And it felt kind of magical, and I said to him, "What's happening, little man? What are you up to?" And he gave me a new response. He had a plate of food, and he had his little sippy cup there. Remember those?
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm eating, comma, and drinking juice." And it was like, eureka! Did that just happen? OMG! Day after day after day after day, he said, "I'm eating, I'm eating." And that day I came home and he created, for an English major dad, do you know what this is? It was like, wow, he just created his first compound sentence. I'm eating, one level, one cluster, morphed into I'm eating, comma, and I'm drinking juice. Two independent clauses, so to speak, united with a comma. He had never spoken like that before, and he sure indeed was doing two things at the same time. I mean, you're thinking, so what? But for me, that was huge. That was just huge. And he's got a pretty high verbal test score. He just crushed his PSAT to smithereens as a result, and that's where it began. You know what I'm talking about here. You're all capable of writing clusters, sentences that have more than one cluster. For a while, he said to me, "I'm eating," one cluster. Noun cluster loaded into the front of the sentence. Then later he said, I'm eating and drinking juice, two clusters. Eventually he said things like, "I'm eating and I'm drinking juice, but I'd rather be taking a nap." That's coordination, right? Or he could have said, "I'm eating and drinking juice, although I wish I was outside playing." Oh, now we got a little bit of subordination going on there, which almost no writer can control. What I'm trying to tell you are a few things here. You can use any part of speech to get a sentence going. It doesn't have to be the noun cluster every time. Watch for this in your own revision. Watch for it. Watch for too many sentences that begin with the same part of speech. Any of them can get something going. That Francis Christensen, he's such a nut. In one of those essays, Notes Towards a New Rhetoric, he took a look at Ernest Hemingway's story, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber, and he actually conducted a stylistic analysis of all of the sentence openers for every single sentence in that story. There's 542. And then he did a classification of how many started with prepositions, how many started with adverbs, how many started with adjectives. Well, he's Ernest Hemingway. He's got the Nobel Prize for Literature. He knew how to mix it up. Bust out of this NC, VC pattern once in a while. To take the same idea, I'm eating, and then get the sentence starting with a preposition, for instance. He couldn't do this when he was 2, but it's kind of another dream. I could have come in and said, "What are you doing, little guy?" He could have begun the sentence with a preposition. He could have said, "From the doorway, you should be able to see that I'm eating, Dad. You ask me this every day. What the hell's wrong with you?" That's getting a sentence going with a preposition. What's the moral here? Bust out of the NC-VC pattern. Number 2, any part of speech can get a sentence going. And there's something else that's really a trick of writing, and it's going to be the subject of the next video, where I'm going to enlist the help of William Faulkner and Ernest Hemingway, two of the greatest writers from America in the 20th century. They're going to teach us a few things in the next lesson: the distance between a periodic and a cumulative sentence. And they're also going to demonstrate how important it is to keep grammatical clusters short and balanced. What's happening, particularly with some of you 18-year-olds, is that you're starting to learn how to be able to pile meaning onto meaning, words onto words. Some of those clusters, I'm watching it in these papers, it's not fatal, but I'm commenting on it. Some of those clusters are getting really long and unwieldy, and they're falling apart. As Shakespeare would have it, their endings do forget their beginnings. The trick of good writing is to keep those clusters short and balanced. And that is not easy to do. And that's why we got to have another little video lesson on it. You go on and have a good night. I hope we get this posted up before too much time passes here. And it's back to D2L work for me. I hope to get these essays back by the end of the night. We'll start with another one. Keep reading The Great Gatsby. I'm going to give you about a week to read that novel. And you can probably imagine what our next paper is going to be about. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Say no more.